right, it's 6:30 on July 20th, 2017. I'd like to call this workshop session to order. I'd like to make a comment. Thank you so much for the citizens that are with us and remind you that this workshop is a presentation of staff providing information to council. That's why we rudely have our backs to you. There's not a time for citizen comments, but this will allow you to see the presenter and the information the same way council is, and I think it's better for the participants in the audience, and that's why we are set up this way. The purpose is to go over our fiscal year 2018 budget, and with that, I will hand it over to our city manager.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a number of items this evening that we want to cover with you. We're going to do an overview of the 2018 budget process. I appreciate that I covered that at the last meeting, but we might have people tonight that didn't watch, and I don't like starting in the middle of a conversation, so we'll kind of put all of this into perspective. Really, the message here is we have a significant need to diversify our revenue sources and increase our tax base. We need to discuss the lowering cost of development. We need to discuss preparing for growth, and really, as we have evaluated that, what is our first step? So with that, we'll talk about the proposed water and wastewater capital improvement plan and our implementation of the required fees to make that happen. We're going to talk about the Bastrop Convention and Exhibit Center, challenges, opportunities, and some of the operational changes we will be making relative to that. Really in the context of tourism, and we'll debate the need for that in just a moment. As we indicated in our last special meeting on the budget, that we would come back at this meeting and talk to you about a communication strategy, and when would we have a final rate to discuss with the public, so we'll do that. And as always, this is the last call for projects from council, because we're fixing to hit the launch code, so if we haven't talked about it, now really is the time to do that. Does it sound too loud? Because it sounds like a lot of feedback. So with that, Mayor and Council, we'll start off with agenda item 2A, discuss overview of the fiscal year 2018 budget process and the significant need to diversify revenue sources to reduce our dependence on sales tax. Just to kind of put us in the mindset of budget, we're going to receive our final evaluations on July 25th. We are still very much in a fluid situation. I call it mushy quicksand. Every day we get a new letter from the chief appraisal, and it's just going down. So it's just a question of where do we think it will land. The state law is pretty clear on how one sets a tax rate. So in order to meet all the requirements of the state law, we are required to have a special meeting on August 1st. The sole purpose of that will be to set a tax rate. That happens to be the same night that the state part is asking for input from the public. Both meetings have been advertised here. So we're going to ask that you meet at 6 o'clock instead of 6:30. It's a very quick meeting. It's really a perfunctory thing that we have to meet. So we will call that meeting at 6 o'clock. The state part will have it at 6:30, and that way citizens can be present and attend both.
And the new information that you don't know is that they have changed their meeting to the refectory out at the state park.
Okay.
So 6 to 6:30 would still allow any of us that want to participate in both. So I think it's great to have the meeting at 6, but for citizens to know that meeting will not be here. They have sent out a new announcement.
All right, great. August 8th, we will present the budget. The charter requires that the city manager provide you a budget for your review 30 days prior to the adoption, so we will more than meet that. On the 8th of August, I will do a very lengthy presentation. You can anticipate an hour, hour and a half. We will go through it in detail so that not only you, but the citizens have some understanding of what's in it. Then on Monday, August 14th, and Tuesday, August 15th, we will come back and begin to answer your questions. As I have indicated to you on numerous occasions, if you get it and have questions and would like some one-on-one time, we certainly want to provide that. But we will be talking about the general fund on August 14th, all other funds on the 15th. On August 22nd, we will have our first public hearing on the tax rate. On September 12th, we'll have our second public hearing on the tax rate and our first public hearing on the budget, with an expectation on the 26th we'll adopt the budget and set the tax rate. So, part of the challenge that I think we have is the need to diversify our revenue sources. As you can see from this chart, 42% of our sales tax next year, 42% of our revenue comes from sales tax next year. It was 43% in fiscal year 17. The reason that that is very concerning is sales tax is very much dependent on consumer confidence. The more wealthy you feel, the more you spend. The poorer you feel, the less you spend. And there are things from one day to the next, things that impact our economy, impact on us, a global nation, our global society, that could certainly impact that significantly. 31% of our projected revenue next year will be ad valorem. Less than a third of our revenue sources are stable. Most of the time, your property tax is stable because in normal situations, your appraisal district will reappraise a third of their tax roll every year with the expectation over a 3-year period of time they will review all of the assessments. So 42% of our sales tax, or 42% of our revenue is sales tax and is subject to, oh my gosh. And because we don't have a lot of fluff in the budget, if we were to lose $1 million in revenue, because that's the difference between sales tax and ad valorem tax is about $1.1 million. If we were to lose that, we would make real cuts for service and we would be laying people off. So it makes me very nervous as your city manager. It should make you very nervous as council in the community. As I have indicated, we have been receiving regular updates. County appraisal districts typically in May have preliminary tax rolls, and they send out these wonderful numbers, and I was right at about 13%. So then the finance department begins to, anticipate what do we think that might look like. And we thought, conservatively, 8.3%. We now believe it'll be more like 5%. So we've had to go back and make some adjustments about some things that we could potentially include in this year's budget, given that. It's also important to note that based on the value of our properties, 1 penny is worth $87,000. So even if we were to raise taxes, and even if we were to go to 60 cents, it would only generate $313,000 in new money. So the real end game for us is to grow our tax base so we can grow the value of this penny so that it's $187,000, or maybe it's worth $287,000. I'd love to see it at about $387,000. That way, when you increase your tax rate 3 cents, you're talking real money. You're talking $1 million versus $300,000. So there's some real opportunity for us to diversify our revenue sources and begin to grow our property tax revenue, which is way more stable than sales tax. Now, I want to remind you that in June, at our last work session, we showed this slide. We've grown 2.8% based on a report we got in June for April sales that accounted for 38% of our total yearly increase. We were finally caught up. It caused our finance director to do the happy dance. That's always a good thing until July. And our sales tax drops when compared to May sales, and so now look at that. We're only 1.72% above what we projected for the year. Folks, we're living paycheck to paycheck. That's what this chart should tell you. Our hope is that between now and the end of the year, we're flat. that we don't have less revenue this year than we anticipated. So I feel a sense of urgency every day to get out there and begin to diversify our revenue base, because it's not the way to run a city, I will tell you.
Is there something we can put that off to?
Elgin and
Yes,
Smithville.
honestly, you didn't have a natural disaster this year, because Dale reviewed the hotel occupancy numbers for May of last year, and you had a flood. And so a lot of people were spending money to replace things that they didn't have. Hotel occupancy was that way. And we can track hotel occupancy and how it's tracked up. And every year you've had a disaster that has caused your people to live in a hotel and rebuild, you know, their stock or whatever. But we haven't had, and let me knock on wood, that is not reason for a disaster, Mother Nature. Please don't do that to us. But that's one of the things that we could do. Another thing to attribute that to is that Elgin and Smithville are growing. We happen to be at the federal prison today for their quarterly community meeting, and the police chief in Elgin went on and on and on and on and on. Did he not? And on about all the things that were going on in Elgin, the new subdivisions that were coming in, and they got 600 lots platted, and they've got streets cut for this and for that and this. So, I mean, it's just, they're not coming to Bastrop. So we need to see this for what it is and start executing our plan. So the real trick here is we've got to stabilize our sales tax while we grow our property tax. And tourism truly is a wonderful opportunity. It would be a very sad thing to be standing up here telling you this story and not knowing what we were going to do about it. Well, we can build a plan to do something about this. And tourism really provides an excellent opportunity. So the fact that we're creating a DMO, Visit Bastrop, is so timely to begin to get out there and market our message. And it's causing us to now stop and think about our hotel occupancy fund, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the Hyatt Regency Lost Pines Resort and Spa is a AAA 4-diamond facility. AAA defines that as refined, stylish, with upscale physical attributes, extensive amenities, and a high degree of hospitality service and attention to detail. Attention to detail is pretty critical here. So we recognize that there's an opportunity with them to bring their excursions to Bastrop, not Austin. I have told this story before, but I think it's so very important to tell it again, particularly in the event we have new people at home watching. And that is, when I grew up in Monroe, Louisiana, we had a newspaper called the Monroe News Star. And there was an article published one day about the blue toilet at 5th and Pine. And 5th Street off of I-20 was a major way to get into town. And so the point of the columnist was, why do we have a blue toilet at the corner of 5th and Pine when that's a major entrance into town? And all of us were like, what toilet at 5th and Pine? Well, they had built some outdoor storage facilities that were chain link fenced with a roof over it. So some contractors had rented the space. One had rehabbed a facility and had put the blue toilet at the back of his facility, which was at the corner of 5th and Pine that you could see from your car window. So all of the tourists were driving through town seeing the blue toilet at 5th and Pine. The point to that was none of us remembered seeing it, so it became the local tourist thing, because we all got in the car and drove to 5th and Pine to look at the blue toilet, only to be surprised that it was actually there. So when I got here, one of the things that I recognized is that sometimes we quit seeing things as they are. So knowing that we had a challenge ahead of us, the executive cabinet and I got in the van and drove around. And we looked at Bastrop as a tourist. And we did a SWOT analysis. And what that is evaluating your strengths and weaknesses, looking for opportunities, and identifying your threats. And so our strengths are our people, whether it's our employees, whether it's our citizens. We all just love Bastrop, and that's a real resource for us. We recognize, thanks to the council sitting here, that we have regulatory authority with flexibility to meet intent. So we're not a check-the-box, task-oriented environment. We have the ability to capitalize on our strengths. Weaknesses are, and I love the honesty here, we mean well, but we don't do well. And the reason for that, you've heard me talk about the fact that we've got a work plan equivalent to what I had when I was in Rowlett. And I had 367 employees, but I didn't have an electric utility. I didn't process water and wastewater. We contracted that out. We didn't have a cemetery. So you add employees for that, we probably ought to have 420 employees for the workload and expectation that's out there. So what ends up happening is that we circle the wagon. And we get it about 85% until the next crisis happens. And then we have to go deal with that, and it takes forever for us to circle back if we do. I find that with myself. The mayor comes in periodically and reminds me of something she's told me. And she said one day, don't you have a to-do list? And I said, oh yeah, I do. It's got 150 things on it. It's color coordinated. And all you're doing is escalating on my list where it is when I can circle back to it, because I don't have a chance to look at it very often. So that's what we say when we mean well but don't do well. We also have educational challenges between citizens and city, because the truth of the matter is that we provide great value, but we've not done a great job of educating you on that value. And I'm not exactly sure that we've done a great job of educating you about the challenges we face. And in some instances, I think we've ignored growth, maybe not acknowledging that it's as close to us as it is. Threats goes back to the sales tax. 44% of our revenue is sales tax, and we've talked about how scary that is, and particularly with the growth in Elgin and Smithfield. And we have no commercial property ready for development, and I appreciate that I've been challenged on that, so Sean is going to take me on a tour. But if we had a residential developer to come in today and build houses, we just don't have a site ready to go. Some of our opportunities are the Colorado River, Main Street, our ability to manage the growth, and our ability to do economic development. And what we mean by that is we have a lot working for us. We have a lot of things in our favor. So again, even though we've got this challenge, there's a lot of things out there we could do to fix this, and that's a good thing. So, one of my goals for this budget is to offset Smithfield and Elgin's growth and impact to sales tax with an increased tourism, community development. And essentially what that means is we need to become that destination for the Hyatt excursions. Rather than going to Austin, they need to come here. We know we need to consider a third-party transportation entity to bring the visitors from all of our hotels down here. And we need curb appeal with sitting spots. And what that really means is we need you to come, stay, and spend your money. We need the sales tax. We need that stabilized. I'd like for y'all to take pay particular attention to these pictures, because they change. And one of the things that Sarah O'Brien and the Downtown Committee and a few others are looking at is how can we better utilize our corner at Spring and Main. And these are just some renderings, just to begin to tweak your imagination. We're not saying we're doing any of these, but we could utilize those to be some kind of destination amenity center for citizens, with some parks and benches, some flowers, or so forth. So that's the segue then that gets me to item number 2, and that's to discuss the proposed water, wastewater capital improvement program and implementation schedule for setting the required fees as outlined in the recent water wastewater rate study effective January 1st, 2018. So I'm going to pick up my presentation now with that context. Because the second budgetary goal that I have is to position the city to diversify our dependence on sales tax and to grow our property tax valuations. When I say that, we're growing that penny from $87,000 to $187,000 a penny, or $287,000 a penny. And we can do that through development and annexation, so that we can maintain current infrastructure while building new. That's called economic development. So with that in mind, let's talk about infrastructure funding for just a moment. There's 2 ways to do it. The city can build it, or the developer can build it. And to this point, to a great extent, the developer has done that. And so the property that's being developed in the city's ETJ, the Colony, West Bastrop Village, are two examples where we've required the developer to install all of the infrastructure since it currently doesn't exist or didn't exist. And so a municipal utility district known as a MUD is one of several types of special districts that function as independent limited governments. And the local government code allows that to happen. MUDs are necessary when cities expect the developer to fund infrastructure rather than building the systems itself. It's nothing more than a mechanism to make that happen. So, what is a MUD? The purpose of a MUD is to provide a developer an alternative way to finance infrastructure such as water, sewer, drainage, and road facilities. Over time, they do begin to take over more responsibilities and provide enhanced services for the residents such as park, recreation, solid waste service. The reason for that is when you get in a MUD, you're there for the long haul. They're real expensive, and so with time, they have to justify their existence and provide the services to cities, to their citizens, because cities don't like to get in them, and I'll show you why in a minute. However, MUDs continue to rely on the county to provide police, road maintenance, and emergency service districts. We currently have 3 MUDs, 1 water supply corporation, and a water district. And that's what this map shows you. Here are the MUDs in white, City of Bastrop's in blue, and the WCID number 2 is in the pink. So, what are the long-term impacts of a MUD? Well, our goal needs to be to lower the cost of development in the city and Bastrop County, and the reason for that is we need to be as competitive as we can. Currently, the cost of development is anywhere from 44 cents to $1 more in assessed taxes when you live in a MUD. You can understand why you can't have affordable and have MUD. So if we're into affordable housing, it's kind of hard to expect our MUDs to provide us affordable housing because it's expensive. And the reason for that is they're taking all of the infrastructure they need to provide water, wastewater for a very small group of people, whereas we spread it over a large group of people. So it takes a long time to pay that debt, and they need it to be expensive so they can get that debt paid for. So why should we care? Well, you should care because the growth is coming to Bastrop County. And if we don't manage the growth, it's going to continue to hinder housing in the area. One of the things that we all know, I hope, is that we have a homeless problem in Bastrop. And it isn't homeless like we anticipate. There are a lot of people in this town that work here, wait on you when you go to restaurants, that don't have a home. And their challenge is finding a shower so that they can continue to work. Just some of the stories that we hear. So the impact is less on the developer, however, citizens feel the burden from years to come. So the developer's going to get their money, but that citizen that lives in that subdivision is going to pay those MUD fees for a very long time. So as I challenge staff is, we always need to remember who the customer is. So if the city does decide to annex a MUD, guess what? We assume the debt that's there. We get to pay that off and annex it. So we're going to pay one way or the other if we want that property. So bottom line, from our perspective, step number 1 is utilities must exist for the development to occur. Development is required to diversify our revenues and increase our property valuations. I think that's a given. And for us to maximize that potential, long-term cost containment must be achieved to be competitive. If not, if they can go to Smithfield and it's cheaper to build than us, they're going to go to Smithfield. The bottom line is Elgin's providing utilities. The reason they've got all the lights on the ground is because the city is providing the water and wastewater. They've got that infrastructure there and they're ready to build. So, water and wastewater opportunities provide utilities. Well, let me say it this way. Providing utilities delivers an opportunity for housing density. Because think about it, if you've got a house on a lot that has to have a septic tank, or drill a well, you're not going to be able to justify density. So as you develop with limited utilities, you're defined pretty clear as to what you can have. More housing density offers us more affordable housing options. Because at the end of the day, we can get all the economic development we want, but if we don't have workers and workers that can afford to live here, they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to go where the workforce is and can afford to live. The other benefit for those of us that live here is more housing density offers more ratepayers, which reduce the cost to each and every one of us over time. More meters, less cost per meter, just a function of math. It also provides an opportunity for growth and greater density. And the projects that we're going to talk about tonight, we have selected with care. And the reason for that is that we have heard very clearly that we need to take care of the customers we have before we get new customers. So what we're offering tonight are projects that are going to provide us redundancy, and we're going to talk about some recent events that redundancy would have been helpful. Offer fire flow. We've heard we need fire stations on the west side of town, and we need wastewater treatment capacity. And we're going to talk about the TCEQ regulations we've got to meet to do that. Land use will determine the type of development. So we're not here to debate density. That will be taken care of through the development process. But this we can tell you, without utilities, there can be no growth. It's very simple. Toilets have to flush, water has to run before we can move forward. So, over the course of the last couple of weeks, we have had a number of lengthy debates about all of the projects that have been identified in our capital improvement plan and really have focused on prioritizing our priorities. What do we have to have? And so if I looked at it as an existing customer, at 75% of our existing capacity in our wastewater treatment plant, TCEQ requires a plant to be in design. At 95% existing capacity, TCEQ requires a new plant to be operational. We are at the 75%. If we grow quickly, we could be up against a wall at that 95% before we knew it, because you're not going to build a wastewater treatment plant overnight. We need system redundancy between zones. The bottom line is that right now, the way we're structured, we can't go from one zone to the other. In some instances, they are what they are. And so from a reliability standpoint, because toilets need to always flush and the water always needs to run, we need to make sure that we have 3 zones, that we have redundancy between those. We need to ensure that we have availability of water, which we're working on, and reduce our reliance on the alluvial wells by Bryant Park. That will help with water quality. And then we need to make sure we have appropriate pressure throughout the system for fire flow. Those are the things as an existing customer, the projects we've identified, that's what it brings to the table. Now let's talk about it as a new customer. We have access to utilities without paying a premium, i.e. a MUD assessment, for decades. It also allows us to annex land that we desperately need in order to increase that value of that penny from 1 cent equals $87,000 to $187,000 or $287,000. Well, we do that through annexation, but annexation requires you to have a service plan. It requires you to provide utilities and improvements within a specific period of time. So by making these improvements, we can now begin to annex. We can begin to grow and and grow our tax base. And it also increases the number of ratepayers to pay for the needed improvements as we grow, i.e. the more meters, the less per meter all of this costs. And then it increases our ability to be competitive, because as Elgin grows, as Smithfield grows, there's now going to be competition we haven't had. And we've got to make sure when that developer puts his pen and paper to it that we are competitive. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Job, and he is going to walk us through the recommended programs that we believe are essential, because we've prioritized the priorities, and we'll make a case for each one of these and why we think this is important. I believe you have a handout, and that is The CIP sheets, we are following the format that was suggested in the comprehensive plan. So we have gone through and provided you costs for the project, and that will be debated in design, construction, and other. And then we have identified funding sources. And by doing this, you'll see how many years it's going to take to get that project done based on capacity, managing the rates, managing construction. So as Trey goes through each one of these, he will refer you back to this chart so that you can understand what each one of these projects looks like.
Thank you. I noticed some of these orders aren't exactly the same, so you may have to flip. If you're looking for one with a water tower on it. It's about page 4 in. So this is a project that we've had on the books for a while. A lot of you have seen it, some of you haven't. But it's an elevated storage tank, and what we're proposing is a different type of base, which is why it's at the TCEQ for a variance right now. This is a bolted glass lined tank. Basically, it's painted one time and it's sealed with glass. It's all bolted. It has seams, but it requires less maintenance, so it never has to be painted again. That's the key. There may have to be some upgrades or something done to the rubber between the seams. Honestly, these are so new in Texas that no one's had one long enough to know just how long that lasts, but the expected life is about 20 years, which is about the time to paint the tank. It just so happens that this location is on Highway 20, which is expected to probably be a car dealership on that, and Mr. Cobart earns anyway, and I don't think that's where we want to be painting the tower, is right over the top of a huge car lot. So basically, this is at the TCEQ for variance. Once that's approved, we're going to go in for a few months, do some permitting, do some review, some revisions and completion, and then we'll start the project, and we're expecting it to be completed by 2019, January 2019. And while that's important, just like we talked about, the redundancy for the system. So those pressure zones that Ms. Linda mentioned earlier, some of them can feed into each other. One can feed into two, two can feed into one, two can feed into three, but the problem is on the west side of town, which is zone 3, if you look at from Riverside Grove west all the way to Hunter's Crossing, that's a smaller well system with no elevated tank, and it can't pump back east. So if there was a large leak east, it wouldn't be able to serve and go back the other direction. You'd be able to maintain that one zone, but you wouldn't be able to help the other two. So basically, you'll see later on some of these projects are how we're going to fix that. So this is going to be the tower that's going to give us pressure. And real quick, which I'm going to mention again Tuesday night, 1 cubic foot of water, if you look at a small box and it's 12 inches by 12 inches, every time you stack them on top of each other and they get to 2.1 feet high, that gives you 1 pound of pressure at the bottom. So if you imagine this full of a bunch of little squares, 1 foot by 1, that's where you get your pressure. So the higher the tower, the more pressure you get. Just real simple.
And how tall is it?
This one is exactly the same. It's 175 feet. Does that sound right? And it's exactly the same elevation as the tower that we have on the hill at Loop 150. So they'll be able to equalize each other. And again, this is the sheet that we're talking about. You see at the bottom of your page. This is how we decided to stretch out the funding. If you'll notice, just real quick, I have a little dollar sign at the corner here so I can remember that this is one we've already paid for. So this is the good news. We've already gotten this one taken care of. That's right. So this is a project that we definitely want to move forward with. And you can see it's basically going to cost us a little over $3 million to get this done. We can make some adjustments, but we're reviewing all that kind of stuff just to make sure that we're doing everything correctly, because with our resources so limited, we want to make sure we make the right choices when we do this stuff. So let's talk about the next project that we have funded, as a matter of fact. If you look at the lower right-hand corner there, we're going to bore a 16-inch water line into the river. This is actually something that I'm going to bring to council on the 25th to award the bid. It's a 16-inch water line with a 20-inch casing, I believe. This is an example of something what that might look like. So if you've ever seen, it's a pretty good-sized drill head. It's going to be in the casing, and they're going to bore under the Colorado, under the railroad tracks and the Colorado. which is why the project is taking so long. It's pretty hard to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers and the railroad at the same time. But you can see the project location, and basically it goes from, just so you have some good points of reference, Popeyes to Sonic. So that's a good idea. If you're not exactly sure where we're on this map, that's going to connect those zones that we talked about. And then we're going to go ahead and extend the line over here from Lost Pines Toyota all the way down to that new tower location. So this will give us the ability to hook everything together. Also, there's a smaller portion that we've talked about and voted on just a few months ago that will extend this direction to the Trinidad Business Park, but they have fire flow. That was something we had a voluntary annexation on. And like you mentioned, once we annex something, we have to provide certain services. So. When we talk about what that line's going to do for us, once installed, it's going to provide system redundancy, which is exactly what we talked about, because now this allows us to feed from this zone here back east if we need to. Just a couple of pressure reducing valves, and everything can move back and forth. Basically takes 3 separate systems and makes them all, turn me up a little bit now. So it makes it all one system. That's what we're looking to do. It'll reduce the likelihood of a future boil water notice because it would have been able to turn and supply water back to the tower east of the river, therefore keeping the pressure up like we talked about, and we wouldn't have the same problem we did last Friday.
Can you say that again?
Yes.
So it's not lost?
Sorry. So with a tower on each end of the city, what that would have done was allow us to equalize the pressure and pump water back up to the tower on the east side. And since we talked about how everything is stacked in that 1 foot square, if you look at it like this, the tower's here and the hospital's here, and the difference between here may be 50 pounds. But when the tower reaches here, they're out of water. Everybody below that has water. Everybody downtown, everybody in zone 2 in the following area. But if you live in an elevated area with a hill, it doesn't give us the same comfort level. So now we'll be able to maintain that by moving water back and forth. Good enough? Again, this is going to cost us about $2.3 million. If you remember, we did have a little money sign in that right corner. So that's good news. Nobody has to make a decision on this one except when to award it. So, and let me talk about Well J. This has been a long time coming.
That project had a revenue bond.
Did it have revenue bond? I'm sorry. So, I stand correct.
Don't get the dollars.
No, we don't get the dollar sign on this one, sorry. If you'll look on your pages, this is where we'll actually go back and issue revenue bonds. And why we'll issue revenue bonds is a lot of discussion we've had. The water system itself needs to be able to pay for its own way. It needs to pay for its own water improvements, its own wastewater improvements. And by allowing us to issue debt on a CO, what that does is take away your capacity when you're issuing debt for streets or parks or things of that nature. So we don't want to allocate tax dollars for water improvements. We would rather have it be self-sustaining. That's where we'll have to actually issue 1.4 in the next fiscal year.
And just to make sure everybody understands, we're going to have a conversation at the end when he gets through and talk about how the debt would get issued, what that would look like, and the steps, because all we're doing tonight is educating you on the need. We're not asking you to take action, so I want to get to the end so that we can understand what's going to happen. He's going to show you all of the projects that we believe we need to have, and then we'll talk to you about how we're going to come back and educate council and the community on how to pay for it and what that looks like. So we'll read the last line of the last chapter at this point.
Yes. So, Well J, this is out at Excess Ranch. I know it's on an expanded map, but this is actually right there off Phelan Road. They're currently drilling the well at the moment. They just completed the monitoring well today, and we're expecting the overall completion date to be October of this year. This project has to be done with the water plant and the transmission main. It's a transmission main that will feed the water back into town. So when this well was funded, That's great, but the problem is we have a well that doesn't pump anywhere at the moment. So it's only a well, if you just imagine it with a well, a motor, and a flange ready for us to tie a plant onto. That's where we're at right at the moment. So again, this is currently under construction. We're using current money that we've already borrowed. So I do get to put my dollar sign in the right-hand corner on this one. And let's talk about
Anywhere you see current bonds, that's already been
issued. Has already been issued, yes, sir. The only difference is we did issue some of that debt through a CO, and that's what we're just going to try to get away from. So again, this is the proposed plant site. This isn't actually the plant there at Excess Ranch, but it's a picture of what one might look like. It'll have a tank. It may have some filtration. It'll have some pumps and all that good stuff there. And if you look at this map, you see our proposed well site over at, it's actually not proposed any longer. It's going to be a well site probably in October. You'll see that 18-inch water main makes its way all the way back down to the Willow plant. That's about 19,000 feet, if I remember right. Is it in there? Of water line. So that's a pretty good bit of water line. The good news is, when we tie this back to growth, one, we need to have this. Two, this area here is all in the city's CCN. And it's also a vacant property that hasn't been developed. So as we bring this line through here, if you remember the Riverwood Bend, is that Piney Creek Bend is about right here. If you remember, they came in last year, got things platted for 170 home subdivision. This would be a good opportunity for them to come back once this was done. That'll spur that growth. That's 170 new water customers, 170 new sewer customers, 170 new BPNL customers. So it's also in their territory. This is a project that won't only spur growth, but it'll allow us to put into action our 50-year long-term water plan for our current residents. So you can see we want to bring this to the council to have the design approved, and that's something that we'll have to fund right away. And then overall, the total for this will be about $3.5 million. That includes the line and the.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The transmission line is a separate cost. So total is right around 5.6 million. Then let's talk about wastewater treatment plant number 3. This is something that they started the design for and actually have a pretty full 100% signed set, and they were designed in 2007. So what we've done because of this plan and because the plans are so old, we wanted to just take a minute to talk about the capacity and where we're at. Linda mentioned that 75% we have to be in design. Well, currently, we're not exactly at 75, but we are at 68.5% or somewhere in that nature. But we also do have some wholesale agreements that will put us over into the 75. You're absolutely right. So what we wanted to do was take a look, before we just pull the trigger on a 1 million gallon plant that will only stretch us just a few years, we figured we better take some time, slow everything down, make sure we're making the right decision, because these plans, when they were designed in 2007, were under a completely different set of rules from the TCEQ. So that 317 rule didn't require as much redundancy. The regulations were a little lighter. So what we do is have a current permit. However, we just want to make sure it's a good idea to build something under an old set of plans. It may not. There's ways to offset cost. That's exactly what we're trying to look at. Just for example, here, this is a diffused air, conventional activated sludge versus extended air. This is a much more efficient way to aerate your bugs. So basically what it does is it gives a much better type of treatment, which allows you to expand the plant. So we have 26 acres off of 304. The way that the current extended air would be designed with the old set of plans is we'd be able to add a 6 million gallon, we can build up to 6 million gallons. The problem with after that is we're out of land. So if you were to build a conventional extended air, that allows us to grow to 12 million gallons a day. So we wouldn't have to change that plant location for 50 years, exactly. So why this makes sense to do something like this is one, and this is what we're looking at with that life cycle cost of plants 1 and 2, is we currently have a plant, we currently have 2 plants, and you can't turn them off to fix anything. I mean, that's the way they're built. They have to run, we're at 68%, we continue to grow, we're going to continue to grow, and as that happens, if something breaks, at the moment there's no redundancy, you can't turn it off. So that is a huge expense. We've done some things in the past with tanks and frac tanks and moving stuff around, but that's not the position you want to be in. So that's what we're here to take a look at. We'll look at those life cycle costs, what it's going to cost to start rehabbing the plant if we kept it open, the operational costs that would come with running 3 plants versus 1, and that kind of stuff. So this also is what gives an operational cost and the ability to expand. This would allow us to serve sewer in a much more, well, let me just go back for a second. When you have a wastewater treatment plant, you don't want to feed less than 50% of your flow. So let me just talk about that for a second. If you have a 1 million gallon a day plant, you want a minimum of 500,000 gallons a day going in there so that there's enough food to microorganism ratio. So those guys got to be fed and they need lots of oxygen so they can grow and breed and treat the stuff that nobody wants to handle. So what that means is, by splitting the plant, we would have added this 1 million gallon a day plant. And with that 1 million gallon a day plant, it would take care of the west of the river, because we're pretty much split in half. We're about 50-50. But then there would be the cost of running 2 plants. And honestly, running a blower all day long is not any cheaper if you're treating 500,000 gallons of wastewater or 1 million gallons of wastewater. It's running all the time. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to be looking at. Sorry, I won't stay on that too long. Here's the cost that we're projecting. Now, this is the 1 million gallon a day plant that we're talking about. We know that it's going to be almost $11 million to build that plant and build it under the current permit, if we can do that. So because it's a 10-year-old design, it needs to be reviewed and tweaked and things of that nature. So what we'd like to do is get moving on that right away. So in 17-18, we'll be coming to you soon with that plan, like you talked about, on how we're going to pay for that. As part of building a new plant, we need some lines to get everything there. This is just a 2,600 linear feet of 24-inch, which would allow us to drain the north side of town back to the location of the new wastewater treatment plant. Of course, once all the other stuff is put in. This Nixon line, I don't know that's why it's named Nixon line, except this property was owned by Mr. Nixon, so I'm assuming that's how it's got its name. But basically, it's a large gravity main. And the cost of that is just a little over $500,000. Trunk main 1, what this is going to do is allow us to, again, bring everything down from the east to the west and back around to this treatment plant. It's another 3,200 linear feet of 36-inch diameter wastewater line. What we're going to do is, as part of this study, and Wesley's going to take a look at some of this stuff, is just see exactly what size those need to be. Now, these are sized for a really large plant. We're assuming that all the flow would go west. But by adding these interceptors in this area, it may slow the time that the sewer gets there, which may allow for it to be smaller lines and things of that nature. So that's the kind of stuff we're looking at in this study. That portion of the trunk main 1 is a little over $1.3 million. Trunk main 3, again, down Highway 304. Also, as part of this review, as we're going through over the next 3 or 4 months, will be to make sure these locations are the best location as well. There may be a cheaper route, a different route. So I don't want to get too hung up on the location where they're at. But I will point out that what this does is all of this property, and some of this is commercial in this area, would now have water and sewer available. So there's your economic development. It also takes care of the need of our current residents because we're at that capacity level. So we're taking care of the current residents. It also allows for economic development and expanding that tax base and expanding those meters and things of that nature. That's just a little over $2.1 million. And then we'll get to the last one, and that's just trunk main 4, and that's the line that crosses 304 and gets you right into the wastewater plant. It's 42 inches in diameter, so what we're looking at overall is what we're going to need for the capacity of the life of the city. I mean, this is truly what you're doing. If we're trying to make it the right size, you only have to do it one time. And that line extension there is about $1.2 million. We've also talked about a force main, because just so you know, Mayor, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but basically our sewer travels now from lift stations, pumps, and gravity feeds back to this lift station and goes east to the current plant. What we're going to do is be taking everything east that goes to Central and pumping it back around. So we would have to install a 12-inch force main. And the cost for that, just about $240,000, which is actually pretty reasonable when you look at all the other costs we were talking about. So some of the timelines we wanted to talk about, and this is our guess at where we're at. The water projects, obviously we're looking at April 25th through January 4th of 2019 for our elevated tower, our 16-inch water main. You see where we're at today, but essentially we want to stretch everything out over the next few years, all the way to 2021. That allows us the ability to make sure those rates aren't impacted as tough as much as it could be if we paid for everything at once. Let me just spit that out. Excuse me. Again, wastewater treatment plant 3, if you'll notice, I really want to point out that we're going to spend quite a bit of time from July to November just looking at efficiency and optimization, because I think there's ways that we can tweak that. I'm not going to say we can lower the cost. I think we can offer you a better opportunity to take care of things for the scale. Basically, if we can do something that allows us to go another 20 or 30 years and pay for it at current prices, that's what we want to do. And that's what this study's about. And that's what we're going to look at. So the big scary number that we've come to, if anybody wants to give a drum roll, is just about $28 million in water and wastewater improvements. And these, again, I just want to point out, these are the priorities that we absolutely sat down, went over multiple times, and came back with the stuff that we just have to have. One, we have to have it to grow. One, we have to have it to take care of our current customers.
So at this point in time, Trey and I want to kind of tag team this so we can have a conversation. One of the things that we feel very strongly about is that we have to provide you a cost of service, short-term and long-term. Part of the challenge that happens when you build this is there's sticker shock. So we want the cheapest construction going in. Well, the same people that pay for the construction going in pay for the maintenance long-term. So what we're building here is something with a 40 to 50-year useful life. So we feel we have an obligation to evaluate the life cycle of this infrastructure. So with that in mind, we're going to have a biological study conducted that goes in and evaluates the wastewater treatment plant that we currently have, that Trey talked about. It will only grow in maintenance costs. You cannot use something every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with limited maintenance and not absolutely ensure its antiquation. So the closer it gets to the end of that life and needing maintenance, the more expensive that maintenance becomes. And we spend a considerable amount maintaining that facility today. So what we want this firm to do is to come in and look at the life cycle and the cost of that plant. And then evaluate that against, as Trey said, shifting some of the load or all of the load to the new wastewater treatment plant. Newer technology, different rules, and just do a cost versus benefit analysis. We think that's prudent. If we're going to invest a ton of money on something that needs to last 30 to 50 years, we need to know total cost of operation. One might be cheaper today than the other, but long term, one might be less expensive, and we need to look at that as a ratepayer.
Yeah, I was just going to point something out, and Mr. Peterson may be the only one that might remember this, but we bought that plant, correct me if I'm wrong, in the year in the early 90s from the city of Austin for $1 and had it rebuilt here in Bastrop. So it had already lived out its useful life cycle in Austin. Now we've worked it again for another 30 years. I don't think you can get that one permanent.
So essentially, the information that's going to come out of this biological study, evaluating our current plant, looking at the proposed 1 million gallon plant, looking at possible development, we hopefully will have the information we need to say, yes, we need to continue with the plant that was designed 10 years ago under an old rule, or we need to evaluate a different size plant under a new rule. We've got more questions than we've got answers, and that's why Trey said we just decided, you know what, we need to stop. We need to get somebody in to evaluate this. This is their level of expertise and provide us cost of doing business. Once we get that information, then we can go back and meet with the consultant, and we can evaluate what the proposed rates would look like. And the reason that you have these spread over 3-4 years is we need to manage the cost. We also need to acknowledge that construction takes time. We don't have to sell the debt year one and sit it in the bank for 4 years and have the ratepayers pay for it. So if we're going to spend a small portion on design, then let's sell that debt that year, and then we sell the next debt the next year. And so what we would like to do is to get this lined out, anticipated, and designed in a way that Tracy, as our Chief Financial Officer, can manage our debt sales, manage our debt schedule. And we know when we need the money, and we can sell it just in time. The other thing that we're going to need to debate with you when we bring this back in November is not only the cost, but how we're going to pay for it. Currently, how we have been managing our debt is through the sale of certificate of occupancy. And essentially what that means is it is backed by the full credit of the city and our tax rate. The problem with that is regardless of the funding source that pays for it, you have pledged your taxes to pay for it. That's built into the calculation that our financial advisors will give Tracy as to what we have the capacity to sell and how we use our tax for. A penny equals $87,000. Last month we talked about drainage. What we haven't talked about are streets. What we haven't talked about is parks. And Tuesday night, I'm going to give a presentation on the outcome of the retreat and the priorities that you have set as council. And they're holistic. We can't flush toilets and run water. We've got to build some streets, and we've got to have some quality of life improvements for the folks that live here. In fact, I had a conversation with Ms. Johnson just last week. They enjoyed their grandchildren, but she was expressing to me it's a slight challenge to entertain children. Well, we hear that from families that are here. So now the grandparents are struggling with the same thing our parents deal with all the time. So the reason that that becomes important is that Trey has shown you the CCN, our convenience and necessity. Thank you. And essentially what that says is that we could actually supply water for people that don't live here. So it's hard for tax-supported debt to pay for a utility when the ratepayers don't pay taxes. So when you have an enterprise fund, and a utility system is an enterprise fund, it should be designed to be paid for by the ratepayers that may or may not live here. The other complication we have is the water certificate of convenience and necessity does not match the wastewater certificate of convenience and necessity. So we're going to have to get, not complicated, but we're going to have a strategy for financing the debt for wastewater that will be set in the wastewater rate that would be different than the rate you set for water, paid for differently. So that's why we wanted to have this conversation tonight, because we don't believe we can wait until next budget to address this. But we're not prepared to address it this year. as a part of the adoption on September 25th. That's why we want to, in full disclosure, educate our consumer that there's a high probability that we would raise water rates effective January 1st. So the bottom line is that we have identified for you the prioritized priorities to provide water and sewer, to provide much needed redundancy, capacity, and the ability to develop and grow. We have some questions on how that works, what that looks like, hence the biological study. Once we get that, we'll meet with the consultant, we'll make sure our rate strategy is fiscally sound, and then we'll come and have several meetings with council in early fall, and we'll discuss the pros and the cons. Then we'll be able to give you a price tag that we feel comfortable with, and we can talk about it in the totality of the cost of that infrastructure over its life, maintenance and debt. And then present that to council, and there'll be time then to educate our community on what's involved, what this looks like, and what it will cost. So, a lot of information, but at this point in time, we'd like to answer any questions, feedback, concern that you may have. Yes, sir. Can you talk into the mic, please?
You probably said this, Trey, but and I missed it. What is the difference between the old rule and the new rule?
A lot of the difference is mainly redundancy. So, for instance, you may have to have some extra digesters or something to hold more capacity. So just like we talked about, I can't turn the current plant off. The new rules require you to build a duplicate right next to it so that I can turn the plant off and make repairs and get that kind of stuff done. So,
okay.
Yeah, what I was alluding to is I don't know that we want to build something and be in the same shape we're in right now. And it was a bad decision a long time ago.
The other thing to remember is just because they're new rules and you have a permit under the old rule doesn't mean TCEQ won't make you live up to the new rules. And it's also more expensive to retrofit than it is to just do it right up front. So that's why we feel very strongly that we need to evaluate total cost, maintenance, and infrastructure. Peter?
Just one brief little comment that business a little bit before. We definitely don't want any fines from TCQ because they will fine you just like that if you have some disruptions in service or can't provide services, and we don't want to go there.
So my question is, if we're looking at annexation, what does that look like as far as taking over, just out of the blue here, if we went over and started moving and focusing more east, and we looked at the WCID, and does that become a joint venture where they still maintain that function and we just come in, or is this something we don't want to talk about?
No, there's several ways that you can expand. You can be dual. So currently at the WCID, we have areas that we're actually dual certified because it was RCCN and we allowed them to come in there. So what you do is you basically work out a special agreement and you say, I'll serve this portion, you serve that portion, and that can be done. But generally, if you take over the entire area, you have to take over their debt. So that we do not have to be the provider if you annex. As long as they're still getting services, it would be okay. We may have some issue with fire flow over there, but I think that's about it.
Yeah, your annexation doesn't necessarily change your CCN.
That's correct. It can, but it doesn't have to.
Is there, and again, we're not asking for any decisions this evening, but is there anything about this that concerns you that you're going to throw up a red flag that we haven't thought about, need to be thinking about? Because if you're like us, you've got more questions than you've got answers. And we didn't feel good about just hurrying it up and putting it out here without some real thoughtful long-term cost of service evaluation. Just as a a little quick lesson on rate making. There are two elements of rates that go into rates that are set for a system. And one is the cost of service, and the cost of service includes your maintenance. So it's not just what it costs us today, but it's what it's going to cost tomorrow. And then the second component of that is the debt, the capital. And it's very much like setting your tax rate, where we have a maintenance portion and we have a capital portion. So in addition to paying for this system, i.e. building it, Trey has to maintain it. We've got to have line replacements, and we've got to have the ability to rehabilitate. We've got to have money to exercise valves and just maintain that system. So you have to take a very holistic look at it, because again, the ratepayer is just like a taxpayer. They have to pay for it whether we took the cheapest road in and pay high maintenance long term, or we pay more going in so it gets cheaper with time. So for us, after debating this honestly ad nauseum, we just stopped and said, you know what, we just have to have some answers. So just know that we're doing that. And once we get the study, as soon as we can, we'll come back and present that in the fall. To echo the words of Councilmember Nelson, who said relative to drainage, doing nothing is not an option. Folks, we've got to diversify our tax base. We have to grow our property tax. We're too dependent on sources of revenue that are easily vulnerable to external conditions. And the only way we can do that is with infrastructure. And so I don't discount at all the sticker shock of $27 million worth of stuff. You know, it's one of those things we're going to ask a lot of questions, we're going to debate, but we're to the point doing nothing's not an option.
So I understand the redundancy of the water, but I'm not understanding the redundancy of the wastewater. So how did I miss that?
So in the newer rules with wastewater, like we were talking about, for a clarifier, for instance, when you run through the treatment process and it goes into a clarifier, which is where everything settles out, and you go ahead and chlorinate it and send it back to the river. If that one breaks down, now we're in violation. And just like Mr. Peterson mentioned, I need to have a backup one here so that I can switch over, do repairs to this one, and keep moving, because those fines can be somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $20,000 a day. So,
but I guess what I'm asking is the redundancy going to be, that plant will be redundant, the whole plant. So the whole thing that's happening on the east side is going to go away?
That's what we're looking at currently.
Is that the plan, that's going to go away?
We don't know that. We are asking the question, is it cost effective to keep that plant with no redundancy, which could be expensive with these fines, or shift the load to a new plant that has redundancy? And that's the question we can't answer. But we know the maintenance cost of the plant we have is expensive, and we also know what it costs if he can't maintain it and has to take it offline and pay the fine.
Is there also an option of, okay. Is there also an option, if you build that plant and you have that redundancy, would you still want to keep that plant on the east side for future growth? I mean, it just seems like that would,
we're looking
really
at that.
Talk about that.
We're looking at it as well, because that's part of their study. They want to look at the rehab costs.
So they're just looking at
and what that would cost to do that. But I will tell you, by running 3 plants, you'd have to add at least 3 more employees. You have to add more trucks, more fuel, more electricity. I mean, it's just off some rough numbers, a little over $1 million just in salaries and maintenance and things that go into that plant on the east.
I was going to
double that when you go
make a point for Councilmember Jones and probably for a lot of the citizens, and give you kind of a layman's analogy, and that would be, it's like having a kitchen and having 2 refrigerators in your kitchen. It's not a redundant kitchen, but you would have 2 refrigerators, and ideally it's not that you use one and you only turn on the other one if the first one breaks. You're doing maintenance and utilizing both of them, and it's ideally a backup if one completely goes down. But the redundancy is built within the system. It's not a sister reflection plant, if that makes a little better
It
sense.
does, but I think the bigger question I had was just what was going to happen with that.
The old one.
Yeah, with the old one, and that's really where I was going with that, so.
I think
And that's what you're going to try and answer. Yeah, okay.
Yes, we feel a huge sense of responsibility because, you know, we don't take these numbers lightly, and we need to be able to provide good information for whatever the decision is, so that we know going forward it's the right one, because we're going to live with this for a very long time.
It doesn't seem to me like we have a lot of options.
Thank you for noticing that, sir, yes. Hence why I said we're prioritizing the priorities. And you can't have development if the toilets don't flush and the water doesn't run. And the scary thing is just like the water main break that happened that required the boil notice. We didn't have any options. There is no redundancy. A well-managed system anticipates those things and can valve off one, and you don't do without flushing toilets and water unless you have some kind of catastrophic event. We don't have the ability to just manage a system well, because we don't have what I consider just good, reliable redundancy, which is just good business. And so from a long-term sustainability, we've got to get to that point. It really puts stress on Trey and Curtis when they are left to manage this responsibility and make these kind of decisions. And, you know, just to put this into perspective, we're also going to debrief council and the community on the water main break Tuesday night. One of the things that I pledged when I got here was accountability and responsibility. And so we're very going to, in a public way, going to be very accountable as to that water main break. We're going to tell you all the things that we thought went really well. We're going to tell you some of the things that didn't go very well, and we're going to tell you some of the things that didn't go well at all. Because to me, the mark of a good company is not that they screwed up. We are human. But the mark of a great company is what they do when they screwed up. And so we have debriefed. And one of the things that I think all of us came to understand in a very scary way is, what if that had been First Friday Art Day? And what if BMO had been advertising some wonderful event? And we had tourists in town. And we had issued a boil water notice and shut down all of our restaurants. We impacted significantly our hospital. So we just, as we go forward, our future requires a level of sustainability and redundancy that we don't have, and it's just good business. Thank you for noticing we don't have a lot of choice. Appreciate that. All right, if there's no other questions, then we will move to item 2C, discuss the Bastrop Convention and Exhibits Center, its challenges and opportunities, proposed operational changes intended to better leverage available resources and increase tourism in downtown Bastrop. I'm going to ask Dale Lockett, if he will, to join us at the table, and I'm going to give him my seat. Dale is, for those watching at home, the new executive director of Visit Bastrop, our DMO, and he has extensive experience in convention and tourism, and really is a huge resource to the community, and has participated in the evaluation and the development of the center. The first thing that I want to do is to spend some time talking about hotel occupancy tax funds to give the community some perspective. And remember, I said one of the number one things we have to do is offset Smithville and Elgin's growth and impact to our sales tax with increased tourism. That's a huge, huge goal. We need to do that to become that destination for the Hyatt Lost Pines and all of the things that I've talked about. So, our sales tax, our property tax, and our hotel occupancy tax represent $10.6 million worth of revenue for this community. And the only stable one in the bunch is 32% at $3.3 million. If that doesn't unnerve you, let me say that again. The only stable source of that $10.6 million is our property tax. Because our hotel occupancy tax drives our sales tax. And if we had a consumer confidence problem and they quit traveling, uh-oh. So I say that to tell you that we are not only rethinking how we address the convention center, we're rethinking the hotel occupancy tax fund. Because it's critical to our future. It is critical to our ability to increase tourism. And so with that in mind, let's kind of drill that down a little bit now to the convention center. And the tax code that regulates the hotel occupancy tax, Chapter 351.101, says that revenue from the municipal hotel occupancy tax can be used only to promote tourism and the convention and hotel industry. So that in and of itself looks pretty cut and dry, but I will come to tell you there's not much cut and dry about the hotel occupancy tax code. So for those that are interested, this is the rental revenue history by type. And so we have seen an uptick in fiscal year 2016 and more of an uptick in 2017. What's interesting is that 89% of the convention center's costs are funded by hotel tax. It does generate some revenue that offsets that. The lack of hotel night data is not clear because to this point it's been interesting to generate what we call the heads in beds. Heads in beds is how most communities determine an effective hotel tax because it really is intended to be put back into that industry to generate more heads in beds for the hotel. The hotel tax fund pays 100% of the debt on the building currently today. So let's talk about the building deficiencies, and Dale Lockett's going to walk you through this given his experience at having utilized convention centers for a number of years. We've had several people evaluate this with similar experience, and they all have come to the same conclusion. So, Dale?
Thank you, Linda, Mayor, City Councilors. Just as a point of reference, as Linda mentioned, I have had experience in representing selling and working in partnership with convention centers in Albuquerque, New Mexico, San Antonio, Texas, Arlington, Texas, and St. Louis. I have a little bit of experience with having leading sales and marketing teams primarily responsible for filling these facilities. When we do that, we look at our competitive set and what makes us competitive as a convention destination. We have to know that in order to be able to compete. So that's what I've been doing in my time that I've been here, as well as Linda mentioned, we have brought some other experts, meeting planners in, as well as the CEO of the International Convention and Exhibition Organization. And there's not one issue with this convention center, unfortunately. I wish I could tell you otherwise. There are multiple challenges that we face. And one of the things that I can point to, and it's going to sound harsh, but you need honesty. You need to know the reality of what we have here and what our options are, what are viable, and perhaps what maybe are not viable. So the harsh reality is it's sited incorrectly. Site location is everything. No matter if you're building a Walmart, or if you're building a hotel, or if you're building a convention center. Convention centers have to be surrounded by attractors. That means that the building itself needs to be located to shopping, restaurants, entertainment, nightlife, and most important, hotels. So if you had to say what our biggest deficiency is, you would look and say, while it's convenient to have the convention center across the street from City Hall, from the user perspective, we're not where the attractors are located. If that was all the problem was, then we might be able to move forward a little bit easier. But there's also no hotels. And today in our competitive, by the way, in the industry, there is one fact. it's an overbuilt industry, way overbuilt. There's too much capacity, too much space across the United States for building facilities than the actual meetings and people that can fill those facilities, because everybody has gone down the same path. If you build it, they will come. And the competition is intense. It is a warfare out there. In fact, part of what I did in San Antonio was help the city evaluate whether or not to expand our existing convention center in order to be competitive. That analysis and that feasibility came out to make that decision to expand. It might not have gone that way. The point is they did the feasibility assessment to make sure that they were investing the dollars in the right way. So basically, we've got several issues that Kathy's been struggling to deal with in managing this facility and trying to bring business into it. We don't have a kitchen there. The reason that not having a kitchen is important is because one of the major revenue sources for facilities is food and beverage. So if you have a large group of people that come in and they don't, and you don't have any place else to feed them, you want to feed them on property. You want that revenue going back to the facility itself, so you can offer to those groups a pricing structure that makes things very competitive with hotels. When you go into a hotel and you want to use their facilities, if you consume enough hotel rooms or consume enough food and beverage through their food and beverage outlets, they'll give you that meeting space for free. Most convention centers across the United States will do the same deal. If you consume enough food and beverage that goes into the revenue, they don't care where the revenue stream comes from as long as they're getting a revenue stream. So they can make a deal and offset the convention center space. We can't do that because we don't get any subsidy portion of food and beverage revenue because we don't create it. We don't have the facility. It was a catering kitchen from design. So that's one issue that we're dealing with. The nothing within walking distance is really critical. It has gone from, used to be back 30 years ago, if you build a convention center, they were kind of rare then, and Bill being in the industry, you have some experience with this. You could build it almost wherever you wanted to and people would use it because it was a large facility that could have your event. Today, the meeting facility is not important. It has to meet certain bare minimum standards. If it doesn't meet those minimum standards, you're not going to consider it. What's important is what is the meeting experience? What does the attendee, because the meeting attendees are so critical, whether you're an association, a fraternal group, a religious group, or whatever, that experience of that meeting is so critical to the financial benefit of that organization. They can't have a bad meeting experience. There's too much competition out there. So what they look for is the total package. So it's not only is the building functional, do we have hotels that are close by, but also do we have entertainment, anything unique and attractive for the attendee. Now we do have it on Main Street, but that is quite frankly too far for it to be considered a walkable experience for our attendees. So the convention hotel, I think, has been put out maybe as how to fix the situation. It is absolutely critical to have sleeping rooms attached to or within walking distance to your facility. So that could be one fix. The challenge with that is at the same site that the convention center is at. So the challenge with that is, as we look to see if that's an answer, we also have to look to see if it's viable to have a hotel at that location. Most of the hotels that are associated with the convention center also have to rely on other levels of business to be sustainable. They need the transient market, whether it's business transient or leisure transient. And so you have the same situation where site location for hotels becomes exceptionally important. So I'm suggesting that the convention hotel is not by itself the answer, and in fact, unless a developer were to come in here and take the full risk of developing it, I would strongly suggest that we not consider subsidizing a developer to come in and doing that. So I don't think that at this point in time that we can look to the near future for a hotel developer to come in and want to do that. I would be the first one to say I was wrong if we did have a developer come in and say, yes, I'll take the full risk, we'll develop a hotel, and we'll operate it and move forward. That could be a possibility if certain development things happened in the area. So I'm not saying it's a forever no on that. One of the other elements is that we are in the most competitive meeting region in Texas, and if not in the United States. Think about it for a moment. Between San Antonio, Houston, Austin, and the region that we're sitting in, and going up into the Dallas corridor, you have meeting facility after meeting facility in great site locations where there's plenty of entertainment, plenty of dining, plenty of options for the attendees to be located in their hotel and walk to the center, walk to their entertainment and nightlife. But we have a big challenge. If we were isolated and there were no other facilities, it would be a different story. I also want to say that it's not that the DMO is going to ignore it or not try to sell it. We will. And we will have some success. There are some groups out there that, for whatever reason, they can overlook many of the issues that we have. But they're in the vast minority. So we will work very hard as we move this forward to look for alternative solutions, alternative ideas, and to start marketing it and selling it. But I think we need to be reasonable about what our expectations are.
And with that, I just want to say that the building deficiencies exist whether the city is in charge of it or Visit Bastrop is in charge of it. There was some conversation when we first started talking about the DMO contract about, well, just give it to the DMO, they'll fix it. I think in this moment in time, it's very important for us to understand that the challenges preventing it from being successful have nothing to do with who's in charge of it, and everything to do with the lack of kitchen and the flexibility that that particular feature gives you with rates. Its location and its walkability doesn't change whether Dale's in charge of it or the city's in charge of it. The fact that it doesn't have a hotel doesn't change with the DMO. So I just want us to stop in this moment and say it is what it is. Who's in charge of marketing it doesn't change what it is. And truthfully, it's better suited to be a civic center than it is to be a convention center.
Dave?
Yes, sir.
I think you and I have talked about this before. Does San Antonio, they have a full kitchen, right?
Oh, yes.
But they have caterers.
Several full kitchens.
Now, do they, so the folks, they still have caterers come in, but how do they manage their F&B charges?
Well, almost all of the major centers have major kitchen facilities. And it's interesting, those facilities can run so heavy that they have to bring in caterers to help offset some of the additional need because they've got too much business that requires food and beverage in it. So they've got their kitchen going at 100%, and they actually have to ask other additional caterers to come in. The important thing is it's the center and the owner of the center, which is the city, that gets that revenue. So they're not paying off or getting a small subsidy from a caterer to come in. That revenue is coming in. Also, food and not just the food, but it's beverage. Alcohol sales is a great revenue generation. A lot of our events that we have at, quote, convention centers, conference centers, event centers, have the need and the ability to sell alcohol. So having a liquor license is something that almost all facilities and centers have. Because you can't, if you've got a meeting planner and they're going to do a cocktail reception for their group and it's a corporate meeting group of executives coming in and you tell them, well, you're going to have to find your own license and manage all of that's a no-go. They're going to find someplace else.
So can you just define civic center? Because you're saying it's better suited for a civic center rather than a convention center. Do you want to define that?
Yes, a civic center is primary purpose for use by the community, for the civic use by residents, and a convention center primarily is dedicated for use by non-residents. Can be used by residents from time to time, but the primary purpose of a convention center is to be an economic generator. A myth about convention centers out there is that we need them to break even or make money. Almost all convention centers throughout the United States do not make money, but they generate money for their community. As an example, the Albuquerque sales team, in the last year that I was there, we sold $84 million worth of convention future business in one sales year. $84 million. The center still had to be subsidized to a small degree, but to some degree. Why? Because it was generating $84 million that would have otherwise gone to other communities. And we used the ability to leverage our competitive nature. We gave away the center space in some instances if the groups met certain criteria for economic generation and or economic development focus. As an example, we hosted an aviation forecasting, the National Aviation Forecasting Summit, and we gave them everything they wanted. Why? Because it brought the CEOs of all the U.S. major airlines and their marketing teams to Albuquerque. Once they came there, they got to see the destination firsthand. Many of the CEOs had never been there. What we got out of it, service from JetBlue, service from Alaska Airlines, was because we hosted that conference. And that, when I approached the city and asked to give away the facility or to invest in hosting that conference, it was a no-brainer because of the economic generation, economic development tie-in. There are some groups that you can attract that bring media exposure to your destination in. So in many instances, communities use these buildings as an economic stimulus or an economic generator. And in our point, so we're subsidizing this facility now. The problem we have is it's not generating the ROI or the economic stimulus that we would expect for that subsidy. And that's our problem that we have.
Your next statement to us, if it's a civic center, is how can we use hot funds to pay for it?
No, I'm about to help you with that.
Okay, good.
Before we go there, and I don't want to get us into the weeds, but is it almost like false advertising if we're calling it a convention center and the industry expects you to have a full kitchen and you don't have a full kitchen? Are we almost hamstringing ourselves? And would there be an advantage to calling it a civic center and then people know what to expect? And then, is that not helpful, or is that something to consider?
Well, in my experience in working with professional meeting planners, they once we send our specs out, they understand what we are. So it doesn't matter what we call ourselves per se. It is, I think, misleading, especially to our locals, in citizens in regards to was it built purpose specific to bring conventions into this community? And I've looked at the feasibility, what is called a feasibility study that was done on it, and I didn't see that that was its purpose. I saw that it was a different purpose, but it was called a convention center and an exhibit center, and and it's not designed to be a convention center. It's not designed to be a conference center either. And there's two big distinctions between conference centers and convention centers, and as well as exhibit. Our ceiling, I was just talking with Kathy, we've recognized the ceiling height is deficient in it. It's only 15 feet high. Most convention centers are 25 feet and higher in terms of ceiling height and have hang points where you can hang heavy items on it. So yeah, but for our purposes, it doesn't really matter what we call it as long as we clearly understand what its capacity and functionality is in that regard.
That's a great question. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I guess I'll stay there. The truth of the matter is that we have some real challenges facing us. And we've got to quit trying to fix something that isn't what it is, accept it, and if changing its name helps with that, then I hope we do that. Because we have to rely on tourism going forward. I hope that I have impressed upon you today with the numbers going back to the chart about our hotel occupancy tax and our sales tax, and the fact our only stable source of revenue is 33% of $10.6 million. So if that brings peace, because it's a wonderful facility, it can certainly be utilized. We're not saying that. We're going to talk about how we do that. But it's not ever going to be a convention center. So I think we just need to acknowledge what it is, and if changing its name allows us to push the go on button and do that, I hope council will consider that. If it's fine and we can push the go on button and keep calling it, I think to his point, they'll see it for what it is. So I'll leave that out there for y'all to discuss, because y'all certainly make those choices. But let's talk about how we can operationally restructure, because the issue I have now that we have established it's not a convention center and it is in its current format not really set up to be an appropriate use for hotel occupancy tax, how do we leverage that to help us with tourism, which we all know we need, and tourism puts heads in beds. So we just got to slightly shift the connection to make that happen. So one of the things we want to do is to reduce the utilities, i.e. the overhead, by taking the building to a different level. Right now, we just allow people to walk in and, we're open, all the time, hoping they come in. Realistically, most people make an appointment to see a facility. So we have the ability to divide the building into zones so that Kathy's office and our server room can be maintained at an appropriate temperature without having to heat and cool the building. That will help with the efficiency of that operation. When we do not have facilities booked or events booked at the facility, we're going to repurpose the staff, because Sarah needs assistance to pay attention to detail. That AAA 4-diamond explanation that was provided to us. So the staff will then work with Sarah to provide litter and debris control downtown. We're going to put planters and have a downtown planter program. So we have flowers and we have curb appeal, and have the ability to maintain that when it's triple-digit heat, because we need to give folks a place to sit and want to stay a while. And so we also will be able to help with the Colorado River access. Right now, you know that Trey and his team is challenged. We do streets, and then we move to parks, and then we move to drainage, and then we move back, and we just do so much. So that helps augment the Colorado River access for our tourists that make that loop, and being able to offer a little, and in some cases a lot more attention to detail. And then when we have special events, putting out barricades, putting out banners, that allows the public works staff to keep doing public works, keep working on the streets, keep working in the parks. And so by doing that, the overhead and the cost of that staff now has a legitimate function to be paid for under the hotel occupancy tax, because they're going to be promoting tourism that we need desperately to offset and stabilize our sales tax. So Kathy will market and promote the facility at a local use, while the DMO focuses on conventions 2 and 3 years out. There is a small segment of conventions that do work here. We saw that recently when some of the electric co-ops came to town and had a convention. It's perfect for that. They typically come Monday through Friday and don't travel on the weekends. It's part of their work. And so one of the things we're going to be doing is hosting the Chamber of Commerce luncheons at the convention center, because we need those 150 guests every month to be reminded of what a great facility that is, and to bring your professional group to town, bring your regional conference to town. Kathy currently has got a draft work plan for next year. I haven't had an opportunity to review it, but she's already working on what does that look like with very clear expectations, deliverables, and measurable outcomes. The focus will be on generating local customers, meetings, reunions, weddings, and events. Those events could be music. One of the things that's a wonderful thing we do right now is Farm Street Opry, the first Thursday of every month. We have folks regionally come to town from all over. So we need to do more of those. We're going to have processes to put in place to track heads and beds data for analysis. And so here is the distinction in our focus going forward internally for the hotel occupancy tax. Dale, in charge of Visit Bastrop's in charge of heads and beds. But here's what we struggle with, is if you come to Bastrop on a Friday afternoon, what do you do to stay till Sunday afternoon? We've got to have 2.5 days worth of programming. So our museum might not be what brings you here, but it sure will help keep you here, because you could spend 3 or 4 hours in the museum and have a lovely time. Maxine's might not be what brings you here, but you'll go have lunch there or breakfast. The Bastrop Opera House may not be what brings you to Bastrop, but a season of productions that you can plan to attend while you're here keeps you here. Just like some of the events that would happen at our convention center might not be what brings you here, but gives him something to market to keep you here. Because we need you staying and spending money, because we need tourism to stabilize our sales tax. So the DMO is going to be truly responsible for that convention traffic, that heads and beds. But we got to be a good partner to the DMO if they're going to be successful. So as I like to say, it may not have brought you here, but it sure helped keep you here. That seem to make sense? So we're going to have to address the debt of that building. And so right now, 100% of the debt of that building is paid for with hotel occupancy tax. And we have, and so let me stop just a moment. The debt that funded that building is supported with property tax. In other words, certificate of occupancies were sold to build that building.
Obligations.
That's right, certificate of obligations, I'm sorry, thank you. I process and it does not come out right. And bottom line is the hotel occupancy tax pays the debt, but our tax is still pledged against that building. So if the hotel occupancy fund doesn't have sufficient money to pay the debt, the taxpayers of Bastrop are obligated to pay the debt. So what we are suggesting is we've got available capacity in the general fund right now in that debt service to shift about 25% of the convention center bond payment. If we track the revenue that's currently being generated by the center and apply this specifically to the debt, we believe that we can shift about 60% of the cost of the debt out of the hotel occupancy fund. And I believe a very good argument could be made that 40% of the activities are part of, it didn't bring you here, but it sure gave you a reason to stay here. That helps him have heads and beds. That is a different plan than what has happened, and I know there are people in the community that will be very concerned about this because there was a commitment, I'm told, that was made that local tax debt would never be sold for. But we have an obligation to meet what is requirements of the law. I appreciate that 10 years ago that was the intent, but time has proven that's not really the possibility or the option. So this provides us a way to meet the intent. I believe we could make a very good case for the hotel occupancy tax being used in this way, particularly when we take the overhead of that building and utilize and leverage that to help bring attention to the detail downtown, to enhance our tourist experience and bring those folks that are in town, the spouses and the excursions, to Bastrop so that they stay a while and spend their money to shore up our sales.
So 25%, when you say 25% of the general debt service, that's property tax, general funds, isn't it?
Yes, in our debt service, yes.
Okay.
Where does the other 35% come from?
It is because I think it's generated about $187,000, almost $200,000 in revenue, pledging that. Isn't that what it was back there? I've run the numbers, and when we present the budget, we'll give you exact details. That's why I'm saying it's a target. But all of the revenue generated by this facility would go toward the debt payment.
So that chart, the chart on the left, you're saying in fiscal year 17, the rental revenue was $130,000.
And that's not a complete year, but that's to date.
But the year before, it was $120,000. Fiscal year 16, you're over one, right? $120,000 rental revenue for the entire year.
Yes, now, it's important for y'all to appreciate that when we have an emergency, the convention center gets turned into the EOC. And so part of this is, you know, we have to go back and look at the impact, because the unintended consequence of that is when people hear we've had a terrible disaster, they quit coming. In fact, Adina Lewis, who is our Director of Economic Development for the county, mentioned today that she still has people talk to her about, y'all doing okay back in Bastrop from the fire? Have y'all recovered? And so part of is every time we're in the news for disaster, people think we're not open for business. Mm-hmm. And so we have to overcome that with brand management. So without looking at the numbers, I can tell you that that's possibly part of it, because Dale was sharing with us today that our hotel occupancy numbers for May are off against last year, but last year we had had a flood, I think.
In June, actually, but
Okay,
yes.
so if the income, the revenues from the center go toward paying debt service, what pays for the operation of the center?
The hotel occupancy tax pays for the operation of it.
Right. Well, that, I'm trying to figure out how all the numbers fit together, because you're talking about debt service. We got debt service and we've got operating costs.
That's right.
And you put the two together, and if we're not even collecting enough money to cover the debt service, I'm trying to figure out where we get the money to pay for the operating costs.
Well, the operation costs are the overhead and the staff that we would utilize downtown. Part of the work plan that we're working on, which is why I haven't given you specific numbers, is that we're going to go back and efficiently look at the cost of that building. And by reducing the utilities and some of those things, then we can provide a cost of service when the building is open, and then utilize some of the overhead, the maintenance, and those things won't be required, and we'll utilize that downtown. And that's part of what we'll present in the budget. So I'm not able to give you numbers. Yes, sir. But that's what we're working toward.
This is probably something you're going to give us later too, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How much longer do we have to pay on the building?
10 years.
10 more years?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
20 years debt, and we're at 10 years.
Social Security.
And so, conceptually, this is what we are presenting today. As a part of the budget, staff is feverishly trying to peel those costs apart. Kathy and Sarah meet very routinely, trying to work out how we're going to make this work so that the service is provided at the convention center when needed, but strongly utilized to again, meet that attention to detail. So this is fluid, and so I don't want to be pinpointed, and I will say that the debt is reducing it to 40% is our goal. So we will be looking at that, but at this point in time, we've got some capacity that we're going to use to help offset that. Much like the drainage fund, we're talking conceptually about what we'd like to see. This journey will be just like the drainage. We will have a high level of accountability. We will take you on the journey because this first year we're going to learn a lot of things. We're going to learn what does work, what doesn't work. We may have some things we think will work that, you know, when practically applied, were good concepts but don't work. But you got to start somewhere, and we were challenged to how do we take what we have and make it better, and this is our attempt to do that as we work through. Part of the opportunity is the DMO needs to come online. You know, their first year, they're in the same situation we are. We're going to learn what they're going to be doing in marketing, and as that evolves, more opportunity. Part of our plan for next year is we need to analyze additional revenue sources for food and beverage. We need to address alcohol sales for the center. Frankly, I would like to see the city hold a liquor license because beverage generates a lot of money. We would have to meet the TABC requirements just like everybody else, but that's revenue that goes a long way to offsetting the cost of the overhead that's in question. If you partner with the vendor that holds the license, we're back to taking a percentage of their revenue. Or, you know, looking at a charge per person cleanup fee. All of those need to be addressed. And we also need to address the catering revenue. We get such a small percentage of revenue today. We give them a fixed market. It's kind of like being out of the right-of-way. I mean, bottom line is that caterer comes into the facility and we've, you know, given them a captive market. So not saying we need to take a high percentage, but we need to, where they're marketing on. You know, we're bringing them customers to them. So we need to look at that. The other thing that we're going to be doing that's not up here is we're going to be addressing a lot of the rules and procedures, our application process. It is very cumbersome. One of the things that was addressed, and we are going to evaluate that against what we are, not what we want to be, so we can be flexible and we can be seen as an opportunity. You know, one of the things like at Hampton Inn, they have rooms. They rent them. They rent them by the hour, and they allow outside caterers to come in. So our competition is at home. Those are where our potential customers on a local basis go. And so not only do we need to look at what other facilities outside of our community do, we need to look at the meeting space in town and what does that look like. You can go to the Hampton Inn and rent it for several hours. We make you rent it for half a day or a whole day. People don't want that. They just want to come in for a nice lunch. Well, if we rent it for you for lunch, we can turn around and rent it for somebody for supper. So we need to kind of rethink how we are structuring this as a local amenity. So those are the things that are going to be in the work plan for next year. It's evolving, but I was challenged to look at it and do something with it. And as I pledge to always do is to tell you the truth, and this is the truth as we see it. More importantly, as the industry that does this for a living sees it. So with that, do you have any questions for either Dale or I?
I think y'all have done a great job of laying it out for us.
I'll talk to you later.
I'm not confused. I'm well aware I have pulled the skin off the hornet's nest or whatever you want, but it doesn't change the reality of where we are. If there are some other suggestions on what we need to look at, we're open to that, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, what I hope we focus on is sales tax are flat. What I hope we focus on is hotel occupancy tax is flat. What I hope we focus on is out of $10.6 million worth of revenue, less than a third of it is stable. And we have to do different. We are on the edge of a cliff, folks. And it is what it is.
Well, if I could add, we've received data from the STAR report, which is the hotel occupancy report, that's out ahead of the data that the city receives in terms of sales tax. And the picture's not looking good. We are down in our rooms sold year to year, year over year, by about 5%. Now that's an indicator, but what that means is we're 5% off of what we were last year in terms of rooms being occupied. People that occupy rooms spend their money here at restaurants and at our shops and stores, so that's part of our sales tax generation. And so we're not trending in a good direction. By the way, our comparative, which is 10 other destinations that we look at, are all up. So it's not a global economic downturn that we're facing that's causing this. It is we're not getting our market share. And I think what City Manager alluded to is there's more competition out there today than we've ever had before. So although there are some things that can impact us year over year, such as if we have a disaster, it can influence our hotel occupancy. You don't want to, as we noted, we don't want to count on those, obviously for any reason at all. So that being said, we still are down year over year, and that's why our focus at the DMO is to get the brand of Bastrop out, which is very sellable, very desirable, can be highly optimized and leveraged. To get that brand out there and start selling, to start turning that market share back to our direction and get our hotels filled up. And more importantly as well is to get us as a day trip destination equally important to get people to come here and spend their discretionary money during day trips. And again, that leads us back to shoring up the sales tax. We get that, your board of directors gets that. We understand the seriousness of what we're doing. We can't wait to get started.
So one thing that we did talk a lot about at the workshop that everybody seems to be on board with is this trail that connects the entire city, all the neighborhoods, and all of the things that are going to be going on along that trail. You know, the art, the potential for the arena and the maybe frisbee golf and pools and the sports and hopefully, you know, pitch and putt and anyway, things like that. But I think that what makes a lot of sense to me and what I see a lot when I travel is if we use that, since it's not a convention center and we're looking for ways to make it generate hotel or the qualifications of the hotel motel. I mean, if we could allow the hotels in town, you know, specifically the Hyatt, to have that as their drop-off point, and so that they have a physical place in town to take their people. Same thing with other hotels, and you know, drop them off in the morning, pick them up in the afternoon, or whatever your schedule is. And then I know a lot of places we travel have loads of bicycles available so that you can ride the trail. You know, it's not a walk, you know, it's not just, what was it, we called it? Multimodal. Yeah. And, I mean, that, you know, I see a lot of possibility, I guess is what I'm saying. And so, especially with you working with all that, I think that the city and a lot of our committees have done a whole lot and are giving you a lot. It's just that we've got, the thing that I see is we have a lot of loose ends. And I think that's one thing this council is going to be really good about, is getting focused and tying stuff together and giving you a lot to work with and stop running in a bunch of different directions.
Well said, ma'am. Well said. That is a great summary of what we do. We have a lot of loose ends. You know, as daunting as this looks, we are very excited. There's a lot to see, a lot to do in Bastrop. We've seen some very favorable articles this week. There's a lot of charm. So it's just a question of, as you say, tying up those loose ends and tightening up how everything ties together and works together, so that when you get here, you want to stay here. And more importantly, you want to come back. So
Bastrop has a tremendous amount of wow factor. We've just not been able to tell our story very well, and that's what we're going to start doing. And I would state that the biggest, there's lots of opportunities for investment. And city manager mentioned this earlier, we're really going to have to look very carefully at how we invest for the future to make sure that they're demand generators on and of themselves. We've got a lot of ancillary things that's nice to do while you're here, but for any destination, you've got to have some major demand generators that it says, choose this destination over all the other options that I've got to go to. And that's where we need to be able to focus in. And the DMO will try to give you some advice and counsel into what that can look like and what that should be. That takes us to the next level from what we already have. I will tell you this, Main Street is a demand generator for this community, but it also needs to be supported by a lot more that goes into it. the positive, we just had a travel writer that came in that we hosted this last weekend. She was blown away. That's the reaction we get from people time and time again, because we have the problem that people think they know what Bastrop is by driving Highway 71 or stopping at Buc-ee's. Yes, I go through Bastrop all the time. Have you ever been into Bastrop? Well, no, because I cut over and I go to College Station, or I go this way, or I do that, but we've never been in. They don't know Bastrop. They don't know who we are or what we are, and that's our job, is to get that message out. And once we start doing that, then you're going to find yourselves being, with community pride being raised, and a lot of very positive things happening. So thank you again. Thank you for the opportunity to visit.
Thank you. So, to move along, item 2B is to discuss strategy, including communication and rate development regarding the establishment of a municipal drainage utility system fee to fund numerous drainage maintenance and improvement projects pursuant to Chapter 552 of the Texas Local Government Code. So at our last meeting, when we talked about the drainage fund, it was very clear that we were talking about it, and part of the conversation was we come back to you with rates and communications strategy. So please note that at the August 8th budget presentation, we will provide you the final proposed rates for both residential and commercial. We're still working through and doing our research on those calculations to make sure that they're rock solid. We're in the process of developing a video that you can expect to see from mid-August through the budget adoption on September 26th, and we'll show that on the cable channel, the website, Facebook, and Twitter. Colin is working with us to develop that. I will ask you to perhaps be willing to talk about the need on camera. We have identified a couple of citizens that we're going to reach out to that can speak about the impact and the importance of this, so that it's not just one person, but it's a multi-dimensional video that explains what's this going to do, what's its purpose, why is it needed. We're also going to send out a citywide newsletter mailed to every meter. I believe anytime we raise rates and do something that impacts our customer, that we have to do that in a way that gets attention. So it'll go out in a neon yellow envelope with big red print on the front of it that says, "Proposed rate increase, please read." That way we don't have citizens say, "Gee whiz, I didn't know." We're not hiding this. We're not running from this. It is what it is. It's a huge need, and we will do that so that you can watch the video, but there's also an opportunity, if you don't stay tuned in to our particular distribution of news, that it will go to every meter that could potentially receive a charge. And then we are prepared to go out in the community and have community meetings, show the video, talk about what we're doing and all of that, and we are open to suggestions as to where y'all would like to see those meetings. We're thinking about doing 2 or 3, in addition to talking about it here at City Hall. We had thought about going west of the river and maybe having something at Hunter's Crossing. We're happy to go anywhere in the community that you think that it may be well received or be needed. So do y'all have any suggestions as to where y'all would like to see that?
Well, you have talked to us on numerous occasions about having 3 cities within one city, so I think we ought to at least have those community meetings in those 3 areas of town, or maybe even 4 areas of town. East Village, Hunter's Crossing, maybe even Riverside Grove, downtown, and maybe North Bastrop if we need to.
With the timing of the year with school starting, I would also suggest, like at Riverside Grove, the intermediate school or the cafeteria, there's a lot of, I don't want people to say we had no idea what you were talking about. So I think even if we just utilize school billboards to help with some of the notification, but I think Hunter's Crossing and Riverside Grove both, I don't think you can have a meeting in one and expect both communities to be aware of that. Kerr Community Center is another place where some folks go there that don't necessarily come to City Hall. And I'm with Bill. I would rather us have, I want people to say, y'all have had too many meetings, we're tired of hearing about it, rather than say, I have no idea what you're talking about.
And I think we should prepare some signage, so like when you're driving into Hunter's Crossing, that you'll see a sign, we're having a meeting on this issue at this location, on this date at that time, and for each area of town.
In the same obnoxious neon yellow and red letter, something, you know what I mean? Something that catches an eye that is not just another.
That's actually big enough you can read it 45 miles an hour? Yes, ma'am. That's a great idea, and thank you for reminding us of that.
Linda, one of people in Hunter's Crossing may really appreciate the intent of holding Hunter's Crossing. Unfortunately, there's not a venue there that's large enough to host such an event. So we're really going to take that into consideration of where the residents of Hunter's Crossing are going to travel to. And normally the HOA meetings are held at First National Bank, and that seems to be a fairly decent location.
Does Best Western have meeting rooms? We might reach out to the hotel right there.
That would be ideal. As a matter of fact, I will check out the availability of that.
And that might be.
I didn't even think of that. That's
I
why
wouldn't
you're
even-
city manager.
Oh, thanks.
I wouldn't underestimate even just like pitching one of those little tents and putting a council member underneath that with a sign and just like, hey, you want to stop and talk to us about this? I mean, I would totally be willing to do that at those major exit points.
She has just signed up to do that.
Well,
I mean, I would do that.
That's the creativeness
Absolutely.
of what's going to have to happen.
But at these major lights, you could put, I mean, and it's like you have a chance to stop and talk and you didn't, and that can
y'all
go a
will
long
be
way.
here between this time, so if you can't make that meeting and you're driving by, I think that's very creative.
Well, and I was thinking the pavilion at Hunter's Crossing, that would be a good place to do it, where there's a parking lot and a spot, and put up some signs, and we're
Where
here.
people are driving by and you catch them, because that's what you're not going to post a meeting and people show up. They're going to be driving down the street and maybe have 5 minutes. And they're like, well, I'm going to go tell them what I think, That's what I think.
Very good. So please note that as with all that we've talked to you in these special meetings, it's somewhat of an evolving process, but that's the end game, so that when we talk about it on August 8th, very quickly after that, we've got meeting schedules, newsletters going out, the video out there, so that by the time we get to the adoption process on September 26th, y'all have received a lot of feedback and conversation with the community and can make an informed decision. Any questions?
This is probably ahead of the game here. Is Tracy putting any kind of pencil to having a rate that takes into account folks who live on minuscule amounts?
Yes, sir. That message was received very loud and clear at the last meeting. And so she's doing a lot of research as to what that looks like and how we can do that,
Okay.
Which is why we're not going to talk about the rates until August 8th. That we need all the time we can to see what all the options are.
Great, thanks.
Last item on this agenda for this evening is to receive input from council regarding additional budget priorities for fiscal year 2018 budget. This is where you have bid at an auction, and I say going once, going twice, sold, and it's yours. If there's anything y'all have not discussed relative to seeing a budget item in this budget, please, please, please tell me, so that I don't walk in on August 8th with a budget that I can make work and y'all go, oh, by the way. Not saying that you can't, because we are certainly open to being flexible, but it would be very helpful if you've got something we haven't discussed that you share with us. Because this is as challenging a budget as I can assure you I have ever had to put together.
Yeah, I think, if you've taken to heart the things that we talked about at the workshop, I'm comfortable that we've got a good start to a budget for this year.
I mean, I'm just thinking about details of what we talked about. Nothing different, but just details of making those things happen, and the city's participation in those details, and that might be better for a different time.
All right.
Mr. Peterson, anybody else, any other? I just want to make sure, back her up with the speak now.
I missed the latter part of the workshop, but I was just wondering if are we looking at any additional staff upcoming?
Right. Yes, sir.
Okay.
There are 4 in the budget today. And there's a director of planning and zoning. Y'all said about 65 gazillion different ways that we needed development and permitting processes to be as efficient as possible. With the development that's coming on, it is unreasonable to expect Wesley to be able to be Director of Planning and Zoning and the City Engineer. The capital improvement projects that you've seen tonight, he plays a huge role in. The drainage fund, not only does he have to be available to go out and engineer those spot things, but we're getting the half associates drainage plan for the community and dealing with that and addressing that. He will be actively involved in the development review process from all the developers that are coming in. And it's just, our needs are so great. We have to be, we need all the talent that we have sitting at the table, making the changes as quickly as we need to make it. So that's the #1 priority. The second one that will be in there will be the Assistant Director of Public Works. I can't express to you the amount of energy that has to go in to bring you the items that we've brought you and the details that need to go into that. And oh, by the way, we have to run these cities. In most cities, as I have processed Bastrop situation, in most cities, I have had about a 15% capacity, 20% capacity where we had operations and then we had 15 or 20% to do all the other stuff. We're at 95%. I mean, this extra 5% happens after 5 o'clock, and if we talk about it during the day, we're all working until 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning to keep up. And so, operationally, for us to maintain the system the way we need, and the operational plans, the maintenance plans, all of that needs to be developed, needs to be overseen, the processes to do all of that requires some operational oversight. Well, if he's got to oversee the operations, he can't be out there strategically building the plant. So these are people that will come in and actually build the things we need to go out and then execute. IT, one of the things that I have said from the day I walked in the door, I know a lot of people think police and fire is the most important thing that we do, but it's not. It's IT. Police don't get dispatched if the information technology systems don't work. SCADA manages our water and wastewater system. All of that's technology. And we're now to a point that this is way bigger than just Andreas. Well, we have Colin that assists him, but Colin's wheelhouse is field and broadcasting, film and broadcasting, which y'all have said you want from a communication standpoint. So Colin is going to go full-time film and broadcasting. We're going to go back to having a monthly television program on the cable channel and doing a lot to educate our customers on the value. So those are the 4 positions that will be in this budget. It does not in any way, shape, or form just any way make a dent in the needs of staffing that we have. But it is strategic based on the things that you've said are important in your prioritization list of prioritizing the priorities. The #1 thing we've got to do is grow our tax base. And we've got to stabilize what we have with tourism. And all of that requires the development pieces of this, from planning and zoning to engineering to public works, to work and work effectively. So that's really where we have put our energy. Mayor and council, if you don't have any further questions, I have appreciated your time and energy, and I know it is an effort to come in and do a special workshop, but these are important enough items that they need to kind of be taken out of context, and this is where we need kind of a check mark. We need to go, yep, you're going in the right direction, whether we like what was said or not, it is what it is, or no, you're not going in the right direction, we need you to do something else. So this is kind of that pulse point that we look for. Head nod.
I think that we're absolutely going in the right direction. So,
Their general, can I take silence as agreement?
As I said earlier, I don't think there's another direction we can take.
Right. Doing nothing's not an option, right? Oh, sorry, did I steal your line? I just want, I know I'm speaking on behalf of the other council members, but cannot thank you enough. I know that you and your staff have spent hours, because I've been in the office and watching some of the hours that you guys have spent, and I know that this is not done without an impact on your families and your home life, and it's greatly, greatly appreciated. And the clarity that you brought is, we're all in sticker shock. It's not the most favorite meeting I've ever attended, but we got to have the facts. We can't make good decisions without them, and I truly, truly appreciate what you and your families have done and the work and the time and the effort that you've put into it. And with that, at 8:45, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
second.
And we're done. We're out of here.